I am New York.
Ya som New York.
I am New York.
Yo soy Nueva York.
Sono New York.
Je suis New York.
We are New York.
Welcome to Diverse City, where we explore New York's eclectic enclaves, one neighborhood at a time. I'm Zyphus LeBron. This month, we're taking a special look at the wave of gentrification that's changing many of the neighborhoods that we've visited. Some experts say that this current trend dates back to 2005, when then Mayor Michael Bloomberg changed the city's rezoning laws. Apart from the concerns about people being priced out of their homes, is the worry that we will lose our much-touted diversity. Advocates and experts alike are warning that if this current wave of gentrification continues, many people of color will be priced out of New York City permanently. It's a reality that some fear will be exacerbated by the expected housing crisis brought on by the COVID-19 virus. On this episode, Fighting for What Matters, housing advocates seek to more closely align with the Black Lives Matter movement. Lower East Sider, where are you? Lamenting the loss of some of the institutions that created the Lower East Side's mystique. And third-party threat, a controversial city foreclosure program that Black property owners claim is targeting them. Those stories and more coming up on this episode of Diverse City. With the Black Lives Matter movement gaining national and international traction, housing advocates are aligning their cause even closer to the movement. The connection, they say, has always been there. Gary Pierre tells us more.
Activists in northern Manhattan fighting back gentrification in that community know that race, ethnicity, and immigration status have always been at the forefront of the housing movement. So when hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets to protest police brutality and racial inequality, those advocates found a renewed energy.
I think it's important right now for the housing movement to align with the Black Lives Matter movement so that we can all see the connection and fight together for what we all need to accomplish.
That's Paloma Lara, an organizer with the community group Northern Manhattan is Not for Sale and many other activist organizations. In 2016, Northern Manhattan is Not for Sale organized protests, meetings, and even filed a lawsuit when New York City officials tried to rezone parts of Inwood and Washington Heights. Residents felt the move was a direct shot to alter the community's racial makeup.
The main factor is what is going on with what we see today, which is that the city doesn't take into account the racial impact that rezoning have on neighborhoods.
Lena Melendez is also an activist with Northern Manhattan is Not for Sale.
It's all connected with what is happening right now, okay? The rezonings was a knee on the neck of people of color.
While gentrification isn't strictly defined along racial lines, it often manifests in the form of affluent white people displacing less affluent people of color.
Gentrification generally has moved from from west to east in Brooklyn, and it also has pulled a lot of residents from Manhattan into the borough.
Dr. Edward Snyder and his wife Shauna Trench are anthropologists at John Jay College of Criminal Justice who have studied gentrification across New York City. They say that the issue dates back to the 1970s when white people flocked to the suburbs. At the same time, federal officials began to disinvest in cities across the U.S. It created an income disparity known as the rent gap and pushed people of color into specific enclaves.
You know, cities remained, especially cities like New York, remained very diverse, often because of things like redlining kept the African-American population very much in its place for a long, long time. But then cities also remain diverse because of rent stabilization and rent control. And now as we're seeing those things diminish, we're also seeing developers targeting this land where diverse enclaves would live.
It's against that backdrop that these activists are girding for a long fight and will use the courts and other means to keep the city's diversity.
The best way that we have right now is through community land trust. So we need to fight so that the city provides us more funding when it comes to community land trust. I think in Rochester, they got a ton of money and we don't have nearly enough, right? So what are we going to be doing? How do we align to the bigger and larger picture movement? Because we have a voice there too.
A voice that will have to resonate post-COVID-19 pandemic in the current uptick in the Black Lives Matter movement.
It depends on how many people are willing to stand up for these causes. People reacted to Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck, but we've been having knees on our neck in every arena, in housing, in environmental injustice, the criminal system, the prison industrial complex, and lack of access to education, healthcare access. We have had the knee of this government, which was steeped in racism from the inception of this country and baked into laws, policies, and traditions. This runs very deep.
For DiverseCITY, I'm Gary Pierre.
The John Jay professors featured in this piece, Drs. Trinch and Schneider, have co-authored a book called What the Signs Say: Language, Gentrification, and Placemaking in Brooklyn. That's currently available online at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Industry City is a 6 million square foot complex at the center of a firestorm of debate raging about Sunset Park's future. On the one hand, there's the developer, Jamestown Properties, that's touting their $1 billion makeover of the dingy manufacturing warehouses into pristine, high-end facilities. They claim that's the innovation the area needs. On the other hand are longtime residents who are unhappy with how their new neighbors are causing their rents to spike and displacing longtime businesses. I tried to find out more about both sides of that story.
One word comes to mind when walking through Industry City: sprawling. The complex is home to eateries, a high-end chocolate store. The Brooklyn Nets even have a training facility and their corporate office on these grounds. And that's just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. Industry City is so large that there are maps like these along walls throughout the compound that show the 10 buildings that stretch along 2nd and 3rd Avenues between 32nd and 37th Streets. All this is only part of a $1 billion rezoning and redevelopment proposal for the waterfront facility. Back in 1895, Industry City was a state-of-the-art warehousing and distribution center, but it became virtually derelict in the early 2000s. Now, developers Jamestown Belvedere Capital and Angelo Gordon and Company have a plan to use this space to create more than 20,000 jobs citywide. Industry City's CEO, Andrew Kimball, appeared on CUNY TV's Stoller Report in 2014 to speak about plans for retail stores during the initial stages of the rebuilding process.
The primary focus on the retail initially is retail that is an amenity for the businesses moving in there. So, you mentioned the BQE, and that has been the natural dividing line between the residential side of Sunset Park and the working waterfront. We need to create places that people can come get something to eat, for instance, in these buildings. So as we go for 2,400 employees where we were last August to 3,600 today to 15,000 where we hope to be in another 8 years, there need to be interesting places for people to go eat.
Despite that, all is not well on the waterfront.
These industrial parts of the communities, areas where you've had a large walk-to-work community working at jobs that pay really well, have been turned into destination locations for the privileged.
Elizabeth Yampier is the head of Uprose, an environmental justice group that's heading a coalition of community organizations and churches that say that Industry City is contributing to the gentrification taking place in the neighborhood.
They basically tell our community that this is a place where they can work. And what they don't tell them is that they might be able to get a job there, but they won't be able to afford to live here anymore. And what they do, which is dishonest is they make it seem as though displacement and gentrification is happening everywhere, that they can't control that when they are really the folks that are generating that displacement, both primary and secondary in Sunset Park.
According to NYU's Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy, rents in Sunset Park went up nearly 25% between 1990 and 2014. Those rent hikes forced out people like Ting Ting Fu and her family. Fu works with Yam here at Uprose and is part of the community alliance called POWER, Protect Our Working Waterfront Alliance. She says the neighborhood is nothing like what she remembers.
I grew up here, and back then, you know, we really didn't need a block party permit for a block party. We just sort of like shut down, open the fire. We didn't need the fire trucks to come in to open the fire hydrant. We just did it on our own. And block parties would just happen. But now it's so hard to even organize a block party because they don't want the loud music. They don't want kids running up and down the blocks. They don't want barbecue in the front. And so that's sort of like one of the main things that I see changing, and it's really sad.
Dr. Lillian Pola McKenna also grew up in Sunset Park and admits that things have changed since she moved away. She heads Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow, a nonprofit that provides job training and placement, as well as mentorship for entrepreneurs from poor communities. She says that Industry City is making strides to be a good corporate neighbor. They've partnered with OBT and City Tech to create the Innovation Lab. The lab's mandate, in part, is to train locals and place them in jobs in the facility.
I think the Innovation Lab for us reflects a commitment from a variety of different parties. So you have a nonprofit, you have higher ed, CUNY, you have a private entity, Industry City, which of course they have their own interests, but they've demonstrated a significant commitment to the work that's happening here, sort of roll their sleeves up, let's sit at the table, let's figure out what this can look like. And that's refreshing.
But Yam-Pierre says what they're doing isn't enough, despite Industry City's claims that they've already created more than 8,000 jobs since 2013.
We don't know what those numbers are. We don't know how many real jobs. We don't know whether those are union jobs. We don't know whether those are jobs that would provide growth for people in our community, or whether they're entry-level jobs where people are just cleaning up and serving.
Paula McKenna says that the problem is more nuanced than that.
So in Sunset Park, 42% of adults don't have a high school diploma. It's a challenge that we have to overcome. And so whether it's through Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow or any of the other education and workforce partners in the community, it's really getting people on track to both get the credentials that they need, but also build the skills that are necessary to access the jobs that are here right now, but also certainly the jobs that will come.
Still, Yam-Pierre is not certain of Industry City's willingness to be a good corporate citizen. She says that the developers have deep pockets and have gone on a charm offensive in order to get everything that they've wanted.
They have been working really hard to do an end run around us, dropping money all over Sunset Park, giving money to churches, to community organizations, doing what has always been done to us, giving out trinkets so they could take away a community soul.
At one time, Lower East Side was simply known as part of the East Village, then Alphabet City. But by the 1960s and 70s, the area had taken on a distinct flavor and a distinctive name. Judith Escalona took a walk through the neighborhood with a cultural activist whose father is a Lower East Side legend, Bittman Bimbo Rivas. He was one of the original New Yorican poets and a community activist pushing for housing through sweat equity when others were pushing drugs.
So I find it interesting that people that are the newcomers approach you and they ask you if you got permission to speak with this and that. I'm like, I was one of the groundbreakers with my father as a kid. We were the ones putting these plots down and we made this possible, and then I have, I find it challenging when people don't know the history. My father and my son This community was burnt down. There were a lot of junkies in all the community. We had vacant buildings. So people like my father, Bimbo, they went and helped to seal up these abandoned buildings and get other residents from the community involved. And they did the sweat equity program so that the buildings could be occupied by families that were in actual need. And it was a very predominantly Puerto Rican community, but it was a ghetto. We weren't even on the map back in the 70s, you know, as part of the city. So this was like the neglected, they used to call it Alphabet City. But now we call this place Loisaida. There was a lot of theater, a lot of poetry, and these people that restored the buildings also were activists. They started grassroots organizations here like Charas El Bohío, Seven Loaves. There was Mobilization for Youth. There was El Teatro Ambulante. Many community organizations that began to help restore not only the community buildings, but also the lives of the people, because they were the neglected few and they were poor and they didn't have an income or a direction.
A job with all the benefits correlated with the sweat and time invested by myself.
People like my father, Bitman Rivas, he started theater groups in the community. It inspired youth. It helped them to get off of sniffing glue, heroin, anything you could imagine was being dispersed through this community. Like there was no stopping it. It was a very big cancer. I observed people on lines coming out of abandoned buildings waiting to get their drug supply. So it was really a very eye-opening childhood on what I wanted to do in life and what I didn't want to do in life. It's sad that he's not here right now. So Loisaida is a state of mind. That's always been there, that mural. And just walking through Loisaida, I see the transition that happened here. You know, it used to be a war zone. It looked like a war zone back in the day. Yeah, I see the revitalization. I see poor people with rich people living together in harmony. And it's beautiful, but there's an essence of Loisaida that has been lost. You know, we lost so many of our leaders in this community that it feels like a void. We used to have fish fries on every block and block parties and community events that would bring families together. And that you don't see as often anymore. I feel like we've succeeded and failed at the same time. That's what I feel. I feel that the people that were the core did not take ownership of the land, which is the true wealth. And that caused many people to be displaced in the gentrification process. I feel that even though I've managed to help people own, to own their property, I feel displaced. I don't feel that Loisaida exists anymore. It's a state of mind, you know, and there's nobody left here. It's like the village died.
Lower East Side is taking my life away.
Finally from us, longtime property owners of color are battling a contentious city foreclosure program that some say is targeting them specifically. This at a time when Bedford-Stuyvesant is being changed by an influx of white men and women and immigrants who are pushing up rents and pushing out old-time black residents. Shannon Ayala tells us more.
25 McDonough Street in Bed-Stuy is one of 6 properties involved in a recent Brooklyn Supreme Court decision that reverted these previously seized buildings back to their owners. Lamar Jones's family owned 25 McDonough since his great-aunt and uncle from Barbados bought the building in 1968.
We're still dealing with the fallout that started at the hands of HPD regarding a building that the family has owned for 50 years.
Jones's family fell behind $120,000 in property taxes for 25 McDonough, currently valued by the Department of Finance at about $1 million. In 2017, Jones paid thousands to retain his family's ownership, but that was in vain.
And on November 2nd, 2017, I believe, we came to an agreement which was documented. There was a deposit put down of roughly about $25,000, quote-unquote foreclosure fee of $535 that was paid to, settle this. And, from our vantage point, that was it.
But it wasn't. The Housing Preservation and Development Corporation had already transferred ownership to a Long Island-based company called Concord Management of New York.
They took over, they changed the locks, they started communicating and collecting rents directly from the tenants.
Lamar took his case to the Supreme Court and eventually won back his property.
25 McDonough was part of 6 buildings that or property owners that went to Kings County Court and said, hey, my building was taken illegally under this city-run program, and these are the reasons why it was illegally taken.
Kelly Mina is a reporter for the Brooklyn Eagle. She was part of the team at Kings County Politics, the news site that broke the story about the contentious application of the Third-Party Transfer Program, or TPT. The program was created in 1996 under then-Mayor Rudy Giuliani to release distressed properties from city management. The program aimed to keep buildings affordable. Mina says that TPT has gone from good intentions to nefarious.
And people are really looking at it and saying, okay, we started this program 30 years ago, but is it actually helping people? The initial idea was there was all these blighted buildings, nobody lived in them, they were abandoned, and we wanted a way to get people excited to move back into the city. Well, now everybody lives here, and we're in a housing crisis, so now this program is now stealing properties from people instead of giving people an opportunity to live somewhere affordable and in a good neighborhood.
That sentiment is getting around. The Brooklyn Supreme Court Judge Mark Partnow wrote during Lamar Jones's case last March, quote, "The city has particularly targeted properties that are owned by minorities. The court recognizes that home ownership is an important means for families to build intergenerational wealth."
He reversed on them and basically said, these buildings should have never been foreclosed on. It was unconstitutional. It looks like this program is targeting certain people of color, using city tax money, using the city program to steal properties, basically.
TPT basically works like this. The city, through HPD, takes properties that are behind on their taxes, water, or sewer bills and labels them as distressed. These properties are then transferred to a nonprofit called Neighborhood Restore Housing Development Fund Corporation. Neighborhood Restore wipes out any bills and taxes owed, then sells these properties to companies that develop them into affordable housing.
They started a foreclosure on September 30th. I've been fighting them for 11 years.
This man at a recent town hall meeting is one of the many owners that are fighting back in central Brooklyn, where many of the foreclosures are concentrated. Even city council member Robert Cornegie recently held one of a string of town halls and hearings on the issue.
We had a hearing, a 6-hour hearing that determined how actually racially divisive the program is and how it is targeting Black and brown families.
The Department of Housing Preservation and Development has not responded directly to the claims that TPT is racially biased, but it has set up a committee chaired by HPD Commissioner Luis Carroll and Council Member Robert Cornegie to review and update the program. Some say the 23-year-old program is not fit for today's Bed-Stuy.
Anyone who has any knowledge of Bed-Stuy, Bed-Stuy is being revitalized at this moment in time. Distress, disrepair, neglect, those are terms that you would probably associate with the Bed-Stuy of the 70s and 80s, to be honest. Today's Bed-Stuy, you look all across there, there's construction everywhere, brownstones are being renovated, there's money coming into Bed-Stuy. Bed-Stuy is being revitalized as we speak.
This is Shannon Ayala for DiverseCITY.
That's our show this month. Thanks for staying tuned. We'll be taking a beat next month to reset for the new season. We'll be back in September with new stories from our diverse city. Till then, I'm Zyphus LeBron. Stay safe.